Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage a moderator of our final panel, Ian Burnstein.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for being here. My name is Ian Burnstein, and I am the CEO of SBOA and Lift Self-Storage, and also own a portfolio of properties that used to go under the flag of Storage Pros. We used to manage 80 locations in 8 states, and now our current portfolio is entirely managed by CubeSmart. So a quick logistical item. So if you have any questions today, all you have to do is type in the chat there on the right, and we'll do our best to get to it. If we don't get to your question today, we will answer it after the fact. So today we're going to talk about how to improve operations in an ever-changing world. And we have a great panel today. So on the screen, we've got a distinguished panel of Stephen Cohen, Ann Hawkins, R.K. Klienbenstein, and Bryan Mosser. And first is Stephen Cohen. Stephen is the founder and president of Guardian Storage Development, which is the parent company of Guardian Storage and Guardian Storage Management. Stephen's been in the industry since 1987. I think I was a junior in high school then, and has developed more than 2.2 million square feet of storage and has 18,000 units under management. Guardian is now also in the third-party management business. And Stephen, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Next, we have RK, who describes himself as all things storage. Great title. He's been consulting to the industry since 2000, written a book. He helps clients define, develop, and curate data and intel to identify and mitigate development, acquisition, and operational risk. He helps them secure and qualify profitable self-storage opportunities, both small and large scale, to create wealth for owners and investors and afford them the highest probability of success through strategic planning and execution. RK is also currently serving as a brand ambassador for StorTrack and is going to share some great information there. Thank you, RK. Next, we have Bryan Mosser. Bryan is the VP of Sales and Marketing with Cornerstone Insurance Producers. This is the organization that manages the SBOATI tenant insurance program. He helps identify business targets and capitalize on industry trends to further increase revenue and profitability results. He also works closely with self-storage owners and operators to help them understand the benefits of insurance so they can provide more coverage for their tenants and improve the bottom line. And last but certainly not least, we have Ann Hawkins. Ann is the Senior Vice President of Operations at Morningstar Properties. Ann oversees all aspects of the operations for Morningstar, and she's going to share her extensive knowledge with this panel. Prior to joining Morningstar, Ann spent 6 years at STR, where she started the self-storage division of their data business. And prior to joining STR, Ann worked in the private equity world. So thank you, Ann, for being here. We really appreciate it. So as we get started here today, Stephen, I know you've done something unique, which was getting some industry veterans together during the height of COVID, just to try to figure out how people are handling it and share some ideas on how to best kind of get through that time. Why don't you share with us a little bit about what you learned from other people around the industry, and maybe share some of the data you collected and kind of where you see it's heading and how operations have been impacted.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Thank you for the introductions and including me in this panel. I do have great support here of esteemed teammates to share information. I will start by saying that about 8 years ago, Ian and I started a best practices group that comprised 6 members, and 4 of those members have continued to be active in the group up until today. And when the COVID crisis started to hit, we expanded that group to include 4 additional new operators. So I started to schedule weekly meetings with these 8 operators comprising over 1,000 properties. And so that's about equal to one of the largest REITs in the industry. And operations really span almost the entire U.S. from the Northeast to the Western states. And we started to compare operations and results. And one of the things I would like to share to start the call today is some of our KPIs that we were looking at. We were looking at a host of significant KPIs, but I'll share some of the most significant ones and just some brief data from March, April, May, and June. And the data I'll share today will be consisting of the KPIs of leads, move-ins, move-outs, occupancy, and delinquencies over 30 days. We started to track these and compare to see how we're doing against not only the same time period the previous year, but also against some other strong operators in the industry. So for the meetings began weekly starting on April 2nd. At the first meeting, we did not pull KPIs together. So for March, I'll just share Guardian's numbers in these categories and tell you that Guardian seemed to be kind of amongst the average of the group. So for March, leads were up 8.1%. Our move-ins were up 12%. Our move-out flat. Occupancy was up 1%, and delinquencies were up 0.4%. So moving into April, as everyone can imagine, this is when things started to get more intense with the COVID economy. And now I'll share the group's 1,000 property averages. So we saw that leads were still up about 16%, but move-ins were down 28%. That was offset somewhat by move-outs that were down 13%. Occupancy was relatively flat year over year. And our delinquencies over 30 days were up 2%. One thing I will add is that we were comparing only non-student stores because the colleges closed early and caused move-outs of students to occur early. So we didn't want that to skew the results. So moving into May, we have seen things normalize a little bit, but still off. We've got leads that are off, that are down 2% amongst the group. Move-ins are now down, we're down 14%. Move-outs are down 9%. Occupancy was flat. However, it was down 1% from pre-COVID numbers at Guardian, I can tell you that. And then delinquencies over 30 days were up 2%. So moving to June, where I was hoping to see numbers further normalized to last year, I do not have the group numbers yet to compare. We'll get those next week, but I will share Guardian's numbers, again, very representative of the group. So leads are up 13%, but move-ins are down 11%. Move-outs are down 10%. Our occupancy is up 0.5%, and our delinquencies over 30 days are up 0.67%. I think the reason that's come down is Guardian is doing more buyout deals since we have turned off auctions during this period. So hopefully that wasn't too much data, but we'll give a brief overview of what those 1,000 properties were showing.
So long story short, the data is shown for operationally, while there's some areas people are performing better, others are performing worse, the net result is pretty darn close to projection, just slightly off.
Yes, and it is improving since the peak of the stay-at-home orders, the red phases. Each state has a little different
Great.
Does that reflect your findings at Morningstar? Is it pretty similar?
Yeah, so I would say, so if we want to start, and apologies, I'm having difficulty hearing Ian, but I'll go off of what Steve said in terms of overall performance. So we had a great start to the year. January, February, and March were all ahead of last year from a move-in perspective. On March up through the 21st, we were up about 25% in our move-in velocity versus the previous March, and our occupancy was up close to 4%, if I'm remembering correctly. March 21st is right about when we saw COVID start to hit us across the portfolio. So by the end of March, we were still up in occupancy, call it 2 or 3%, or sorry, in move-ins. But we were, the variance to last year had obviously gone down dramatically over the last, call it 10 days of the month. In April, we were hit, pretty hard if you look at just the numbers in terms of we were closer to probably extras results, 35 to 37% down in move-ins across the portfolio. Move-outs also down, which helped us from a net perspective, but we were negative in nets in April. We were pretty shocked, candidly, that we still had 6 out of 10 people coming to us during that time period, which I think speaks to the need-based component of the business. In May, we saw improvement. We were down kind of 27 to 28% across our portfolio in our move-in velocity. Move-outs again down, but our nets were positive for the month. And then in June, we've seen things trend better this month in terms of move-ins. We've been, depending on kind of the day of the week, between kind of 8 and 15% down in move-ins. I think right now we're a little bit under 10% down in move-ins versus last year for June. But the trailing, call it 7 to 10 days, have been positive for us this month. So we're certainly seeing improvement. We're seeing more so in some of our Texas markets, in our Virginia market. Our markets like Charlotte and Atlanta have been a bit slower to rebound for us. I would say if you're looking at our move-outs year to date, I think they're down about 10% versus last year. We, similar to Steve, we always have a philosophy of working quite closely with tenants, but it's kind of a worst case scenario if we need to auction. So we always tend to work closely, and we've been more active in talking about things like buyout plans and the like. From a collections perspective, we're up a few percentage points versus last year, largely, as I think Steve referenced, in the over 30 days. And then looking at our actual collections, we are positive to last year. The one category that's been more challenging for us, which I think in conversations with other operators has been true for them as well, as cash payments, with people not out and about. And also those tend to be payments who may not, people who may not have the cash on hand. That's where we've struggled from a collection perspective.
Great. Thanks, Ann. So now I want to switch over, Bryan. I'd love to hear input from the rest of the group as well. Obviously, driving additional revenue has become increasingly more important. Talk a little bit about what you're able to do as far as helping property owners drive more revenue through tenant insurance.
Sure. No, this is a great topic. Certainly, the insurance industry is a slow-moving ship, and COVID has certainly caused the insurance industry as a whole really to shift and change and adapt to using better technology. And the one thing that we've really done recently, and it's always been in the pipeline, is really changing the online rentals, and then also the kiosk and some of the point of sale systems are starting to use the contactless features as well. So it's really helped with our numbers, and our numbers are almost identical to what Stephen and Ann were talking about. Right now we are seeing it's about flat. The nice thing about offering tenant insurance through the facilities, it's really a free product. The carriers that offer that really do not charge for it. They offer training, support, and it provides an additional income to the facilities as a whole. Not only to the facilities for litigious lawsuits at a facility level, but it gives the customers some additional coverage that their homeowners policy might not have. And in particular, people, the last 2-3 months, people haven't been out, so they're not checking on their storage units. They're not active in going back and forth with them. And also, we're seeing a little bit of an uptick with some break-ins because the facilities aren't fully staffed, and they might not have people there around the clock, so they're susceptible to break-ins and thefts. that if people were there, that they that would deter them from that.
Great. Stephen, anything you're doing in particular at Guardian, other than any other line items that you've been able to utilize within operations?
With respect to driving
Generate more revenue. Yeah.
Well, for Guardian during this time period, we didn't really see it as a time to drive revenue as much as a time or an opportunity to improve operations to maximize performance. So we looked at everything we were doing and looked at ways to deliver it better, smoother, and quicker for the customer, and using alternate methodologies or technology. On March 18th, Guardian actually went to complete remote operation. We ceased in-store operations because at the time we didn't really know where this was going to go. We felt we could still service the customer and process new leases remotely. So in a short period of time, about 4 days, utilizing some existing technology that we had, we went to remote store operations, and that has led to a host of technological and process improvements that have led to a more of a touchless environment in today's world. So, and like others, I mean, we turned off and delayed our existing customer rent increases. We turned off our auctions, but we still continued to process new sales and handle all customer service remotely. We had managers going in just once a day to check on the physical asset and meet maintenance there who was on site. So that's pretty much how this started out for Guardian.
Great. So I want to come back to technology in a moment, but when we talk about revenue, I think it's tenant revenue management obviously is critical. RK, in your experience, obviously with years of consulting and now your relationship with StorTrack, talk a little bit about things you've seen or things StorTrack can do to help operators really make sure that they are optimizing rent, getting the right rates. We're seeing a lot of competition decreasing their rates locally. So tell us a bit about what StorTrack does and how they help people, and maybe a little bit about your own experience over the years.
Sure. Thanks again, Ian. Appreciate the opportunity. So, the most interesting is to watch the reaction of operators, both large and small, to the pandemic and how that's affected their operations on a day-to-day basis, and then what that does with rents and how that matriculates to the bottom line. And I think overall, Stephen is point on when he says most operators, I think it reflects his operations as well, they kind of put things on hold relative to revenue management and driving rents, trying to hold on to what they had to make sure that they weren't losing their existing tenant base and that their rent revenue streams remained constant. So the biggest probably revelation to me was the bifurcation in the market in a trend that I've been working on to understand, analyze, and also to proselytize a little bit to tell people that it's really germane, and that is the difference between a primary market and secondary and tertiary markets. So what we saw in primary markets was the large operators, as their algorithms kicked in and traffic may have slowed down to the website, definitely slowed down to the in-store because they weren't necessarily manning all the stores, although call centers were picking those calls up. The traffic was off a bit. The conversion ratio, because people weren't out and about and moving in, they were actually converting fewer amounts of those leads. And so overall, it was how many leads were being driven and how many were actually moving in. And that caused a number of the large operators to do some fairly significant price slashing. I monitored out of the top 25 MSAs, I looked at 7 MSAs where I saw major operators such as Public Storage, particularly Extra Space, take almost a 50% price reduction in many size categories, to try and keep the level of rental activity up. But what was interesting is when I did that same kind of analysis in the secondary and particularly the tertiary markets, we didn't see that much at all. There was very little heavy discounting that was going on where there wasn't a presence of third-party management amongst the REITs and almost zero store ownership amongst the REITs. So that trend that in days gone by where we used to chase the major operators because we believed that there would always be rent growth there as they pushed rates and used revenue management has now come 180 degrees, and we're looking at the flip side of that coin where new competition and now the pandemic and the traffic slowing has really caused their acceleration of rental rate decreases to solve that problem. What probably hurt it more was the fact they had already amped up their concession ratios because they were responding to softening in the market with new product, but we hadn't really seen this huge reduction in rents. And now we finally saw that they were starting to significantly discount the actual rental rates. So the contractual rate that someone goes in on is lesser, and that theoretically was continuing to drive their rental streams, et cetera. But again, in the secondary and tertiary markets where there's a predominance of owner operators, used to be called mom and pops, they were never really in the process of pushing their rates. They still held back to the old days where, perhaps once or twice a year we looked at our rent rolls and made increases, but we weren't using sophisticated data tools to do that. And they stayed constant in their rates. We didn't see much diminution in rates at all. Perhaps a little bit more use of concessions, going from a half a month free to a full month free, but we didn't see any major change. And the beauty of being able to get your data, whether you get it from any one of the providers, is how often are they updating their rates and how many stores are they using in their sampling. So basically StorTrack, the advantage there is that they will scrape the rates of anybody who has their rates out on the internet, becomes a candidate to be scraped, and those rates are being scraped at least once a day. There's a movement there to actually do that more than once a day so that we're getting morning and afternoon rate pulls. But because it's spread over the entire country, we're not focused on any markets which skew our data then because we're in the top 25 or 50 MSAs. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I understand chasing the greater number of potential customers, and so you go to those markets to do so. But there is an advantage to being able to see the data over a complete spectrum and not just in the major metropolitan markets.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing. So now, Anne, looking back a little bit, Stephen mentioned how they went completely remote for a while. I don't know what Morningstar actually decided to do during that time period, and maybe share with us, and then Stephen, you follow about how you went remote, what kind of technology you guys utilized, and maybe we can even further that talk about, and RK even add in where you see some of this technology changes are going to continue on for the foreseeable future, not just during COVID.
Yeah, so for us, I believe it was on March 24th, we closed and locked our office doors, but we still had our team on site. So we basically had a comprehensive, to take a step back, a comprehensive coronavirus response plan that was essentially scenario analysis of, if this happens, here's how we will respond, so that we were proactively able to make decisions and come to agreement on exactly what our operational response would be to whatever we thought might hit us through this time period. So we simultaneously, in conjunction with locking our office doors, put in place measures with, kind of following the CDC cleaning guidelines. We eliminated overlapping of any employees in the office. And then we had all the technology in place to be able to run completely remotely, but we did and still do view that as a kind of worst case scenario in terms of we'd prefer to at least have someone on site for any number of reasons. So with those locked doors, we took everything remotely via the phone. For someone who came and knocked on our door, we kind of get a sign up for the number that they could call to reach us, and we could serve them over the phone. And we are still operating with our doors locked. Now, we have had some instances where we have run sites remotely, and those would be instances where we were in a market where we have one office and someone potentially had COVID symptoms, or someone had, one of our team members had childcare issues, and we had some coverage gaps, but it has been few and far between in terms of how we've been running our sites. And it's worked quite well for us so far, and really haven't had any major issues, and don't think we're losing a meaningful number of move-ins because of that. And it's also been a great way for us to build team morale so that they feel like they have control over their environments and are able to, protect our tenants and protect themselves and the rest of the team.
Great. Is there anything new with respect to technology that you've had to utilize that could be helpful for people to hear? Or Steven, it looks like you're.
Yeah. So we
Right.
do have we did implement some new call tracking software. We're using CallRail, and that's been helpful with some of our call routing among different sites. We had kind of a little before coronavirus put in place Verizon One Talk. We have iPads at all of our sites. We have e-sign. So all of those were kind of critical tools to enable us to to run everything remotely, because people could take home the site iPad, people could take home the site iPhone. They could also run via SiteLink on MyHub. They could run the store and do remote rentals via that platform. So there were a number of ways we could do things, and it was quite seamless when we have had to do that. But there was nothing major we had to put in place in order to be able to do that. We also have done some other technology tests and have moved forward permanently with some of these options. An example would be like we're now running internally the online chat on our website. Reason being, more people are probably going to the site versus coming to the store. How can they be in contact with our team and do a rental via chat? We've made it more prominent on our site. We've added some functionality to our site, like virtual tours, and that have been very helpful in terms of facilitating a more customer-friendly experience and in the rental process during this time period.
Great. Thank you. And Steven, how about Guardian?
Yes, I can build on some of the things Dan highlighted there. First of all, Guardian's done many of the same things that Morningstar has done. However, one item I'd like to add is that before the COVID economy began, Guardian was considering moving to an in-house call center. We felt that with technology and the number of properties that we have now, that we could do a very good job and provide personal service commensurate with our brand and in-house, rather than using a third party who doesn't know the brand and the particular properties or the markets as well as our people would. So that was a goal ahead of COVID. What COVID did is sort of gave us a training ground in which to do this. For instance, when we went to remote operations and people were not visiting the stores, we had our people handling many more inbound calls and less visits. What this did, as we went to a in-store operations on May 11th, so we were out of our stores for 7 weeks, is with less in-store visits, less retail type visits by the public, we've had certain managers handle overflow calls and calls from a remote call center operation, so to speak. They're doing it basically from home because we haven't set up a physical operation yet. We have space being renovated now to house it. But what you can see what the COVID economy did is it created the impetus to move forward quicker and also provide a training ground to us. So what may happen going forward is we may have less in-store property management staff because we don't need that overlap in the store. As long as we have one manager in the store, they can handle the type of traffic thus far that's been occurring. And if that traffic doesn't come back, it may become a permanent situation. We'll still have a call center regardless, but we will move to less in-store personnel by maybe 8 hours per week, 8 to 12 hours per week.
Great. So RK, on some of the clients that you've been consulting with, Obviously, there's been a significant impact on performance, in the economy right now. Any sense of how far off kind of projections are to reality these days? I mean, is that? Do you have any sense of that?
I think the delta is bigger in new stores that are in lease up that have not yet gotten to stabilization. I think what we saw amongst a number of clients that I work with is that they saw a definite stall in the lease up, and they're going to be at this point somewhere in the neighborhood of in the major metropolitan markets as much as 25 to 30% behind their lease up velocity that they had projected for 2020. And in the smaller markets, it's off a delta of about 5 to 7%. So there's a market difference between major markets and the secondary markets. But certainly the stabilized stores have continued to maintain their position, although feeling the effects of COVID and a lack of traffic and movement. Once the states started opening up, operators that report into me were telling me that they saw their move out velocity really increase. That was their biggest challenge, was not anticipating how many folks would move out, and because they weren't necessarily on site during full office hours, it perhaps came as a bit more of a surprise than it normally would have, because they would come back in the afternoon and there would be 2 or 3 move-outs that they hadn't anticipated. So the reaction has been varied, but I think it's more significant of an impact, again, in the major markets, but major markets with stores in lease-up being those that have the furthest delta from their projections.
So, Ann, how about maybe a little bit on performance metrics compared to projection and pro forma? What has Morningstar been seeing?
Yeah, so I would say we certainly are off. We were ahead through March. April was a little bit kind of flattish, I believe, but really, in April, May, and June, we materially stepped up our reserves against our ARs. So that's a large portion, and again, kind of remains to be seen. We're just starting to restart the lien process to see, how things play out in reality. Again, probably 50% of our miss to pro forma to date is about, it's really from the increase in our reserves. So we hope that we'll see something positive there and not be quite so far off. We are, call it flattish to marginally up from a revenue perspective to last year on actual performance for our same store pool, and our NOI is up to last year still through May. And the reason for that is, again, our revenue is still just marginally up. And we've also been very carefully watching our expenses. We have not, I would say, been cutting expenses with the exception of marketing, but we have been stretching our dollars as far as possible and bringing whatever we can in-house so that we can really manage those. So again, do I think we could see some type of positive movement back a little bit closer to pro forma? Possible, but it's also concerning to look at the numbers coming out of markets where we have a strong presence right now with coronavirus cases, like Texas and Houston. We have quite a number of stores in Florida, obviously North Carolina, and those are some of the states that are getting hit pretty hard right now in the news with the coronavirus case increase load.
Great. And Stephen.
So Guardian is a little bit of a tale of two cities, sort of a Charles Dickens novel. In Colorado, the lease-ups are somewhat on schedule in the western market, and in the eastern market in Pennsylvania, the lease-ups have been slow. We've had a significant number of properties come online pre-COVID and begin their lease-ups, and they were already slow pre-COVID. I think that's 100% due to additional development in the market and more supply that came online at the same time our new properties did. So we were already slow. COVID exacerbated that a bit with the loss of expected increases in April and May, which although May improved over April, it was still slower than previous year. and same with June thus far. So I can tell you that the average rental rates for our leased up stores are probably 40% off of pro forma in the Eastern market, in Pennsylvania for sure, and probably 40% off in lease pace or square feet. So we did recast those lease up properties to achieve their stabilized occupancy in a longer period of time, which I think would be similar to what RK was speaking about. We've added 1 to 2 years to those lease up projections. So, however, the good news on the mature store side, through May, our T3 actual to budget comparison is really on budget. It's 0.3% over budget, so essentially on budget. And the actual to 2019, the actual results, T3 results through May 2020 versus 2019 is up 3.4% on mature stores only.
Great. So, Bryan, as we're talking here about finding ways to improve operations, improve revenue, what have you seen as far as penetration rates on insurance, and maybe touch on things that you've been talking to operators about how they could maybe help improve?
Sure. Penetration has been the same pre-COVID or in COVID. We haven't really seen the needle move at all. So our numbers are going to be very similar to what they've been in the past. What we are seeing is operators talking with us about how to increase their penetration and how to go to lease compliance and how to change their process when they're doing a new rental, and incorporating the tenant insurance earlier in the process, and not throwing it on at the back when they're signing the contract. And we're seeing those numbers are helping. So just changing their tactic and how they present the insurance and the value of having the coverage, we are seeing some impact there. But for overall, it's been flat. I mean, it really had the numbers that Steven and RK were talking about. Our numbers kind of mirror the numbers that we're seeing that we've seen in the past.
Great. RK, a question just came in actually from a viewer wanting to know specifically, how can I utilize StorTrack to help maximize revenue at my store? And then there's a follow-up. How can I determine whether or not I want to start rent increases yet?
Well, the biggest thing that you can do is take a historical view of the StorTrack data. So the StorTrack data goes back over 3 years, and it'll give it to you in a graphic format if you want to look at it. So you would go into your market and select the stores that are your primary competitors, and that you would think would be the closest ones that you would want to benchmark your rates off of. And then you can look and see what's happened to the rental trends in that, as well as where they are in the last reporting period of what we call current rates today. And then I always double check that against a web check to look at their rates dynamically online to see where they're at that given time. But having the confidence to know where your rates are and looking at your peer group and the trend in your peer group gives you the opportunity to perhaps boost your rates if you haven't been at the top of your market already. You know, storage is interestingly a kind of a herd mentality where a few leaders in the market can set the pace for everything else, either in rent increases or decreases. Either way, I mean, the way they go rises the entire tide. So, but as a user of that data, what you can do is go in and drill down to specific stores, or you can look at your macro market. All of those things are the biggest help to you. And then also within the StorTrack data, in our newest product, which is the MVP product, you can actually go in and see the new inventory that's potentially being added to your market. And if you know of something that's not showing up there, of a new store that's in the market, you can let us know, and that data can then be added to it, and they'll begin to track it. But knowing what's coming online as well is a good idea to use that data. So one of the things I would say is to try and get out ahead of it. And it's very difficult, I understand, to want to press rates right now when occupancies are just barely stable in some markets or declining. It's typically not the time you move forward. But drill down to your specific size categories where you have your highest occupancies and begin to test and push your rents where you have the most confidence, where you have the most leads coming in. If it's 10 by 15s or 10 by 20s, and it used to be the smaller sized, less than 10 by 10, then that's where I would start pressing my rates, and I would start to look at my peer group, develop a plan based on that data, and then begin to implement it. And there's two segments to this, of course, and that is, what do I do with my existing customers, and then what I do with my my new incoming street rates. So you want to look at both of those and begin to develop a balance between the two. But certainly, a small move up in perhaps those laggards that are not at retail price, getting them moved up to street rates is probably the opportunity I would look for first. If I had to take my low-hanging fruit, that's likely where I would start.
Great, thank you for that. Stephen, there was also a question about, you had mentioned about the buyout option with your tenants. Someone was asking specifically, what did you mean by that? So why don't you maybe elaborate on that?
Okay, sure. Sorry. It's kind of a common term at Guardian, but maybe not used with other operators. A buyout to us is when, during an auction process, we make a deal with a tenant to do a partial payment on what's owed, on the balance owed, and move out. So we just call it a buyout. And that's becoming a tool was used a little more frequently during the beginning of the COVID economy, because we shut down auctions. It wasn't something we could do during that time period. It was just not appropriate. We are gearing up to reinstitute our auctions starting in July.
Great. And Ann, how about Morningstar?
Let me add one thing though, with significant lenience on the part of managers to work with tenants, especially those that have been affected by COVID.
And Ann, how about Morningstar? What's been the experience with? Have you been writing off with cutting deals with tenants? Are you starting up with options? What have you been doing about receivables?
Yeah, so I would say our process has been quite similar to the Guardian one. So we always, even in non-coronavirus times, have a process where we really want to work with people. We'd rather someone do a pay and go in certain instances than auction. And certainly it's never our goal to auction someone's property, right? So we have been doing similar to Guardian. We have been working on, we call it pay and go versus a buyout. But exact same, process where it's, hey, we understand this is a difficult time. If you're able to do so and come pay X% of your outstanding balance and take your stuff, that's preferable, and we'll continue to do that. We are also restarting our auction processes for July. To the extent that we've been able to work with tenants to date in the manner that Guardian has, we've been doing similar things, and that has been our process. What we have found is, particularly at certain stores that run higher ARs, that have a more prolific delinquent tenant base, really there is a need for some type of we need you to pick up the phone and talk to us by this date, or else this event is going to happen, which we could mutually work around having that event being an auction not happen. So that's also part of why we're going to restart our auction process. Is it provides a natural conversation starter, whereas as some tenants get more and more delinquent and theoretically might be hearing from more people who are trying to collect from them, you are less likely to hear back from them. So, as I mentioned, we've dramatically increased our reserves. That's we hope that won't all be written off. We have been working along the way. We have looked at a detailed level at every single tenant across every store, and have hope that there'll be some positive outcomes there. But it's a touchy time period, and I think the empathy with the tenant is something that's top of mind for us as we go back into restarting the auction process.
Great. So, Ann, Stephen mentioned, and there was a question about this, which I'll get to, but are you guys using a call center or were you using a call center
do.
beforehand, and are you now?
We have both answers are yes. We do use a call center. We use XPS. We continue to use that call center. We have that around. I mean, at our size, we operate 73 open stores right now. In total, we have about 80 assets between kind of stuff that's in the works and open and operating. So economically, I think it could make sense to open a call center of our own. It's just there's also an operational component to that, and whether we do or don't want to take that on. Now, I will say, and to date, we have decided that we do not want to take on that operational complexity. But I will say, I think there are many lessons from this time period. One of them, as it pertains to call centers, is it doesn't have to be a call center in the traditional sense that we might have thought of. So, I mean, I think that Stephen's seen some of this. I mean, with technology, routing calls, people can be anywhere to quote, run a call center. It does not have to be a physical office with a number of people sitting at desks. And that, I think, makes it potentially more interesting longer term. But again, no immediate plans to move in that direction.
And Stephen, there was a question about what technology were you using to utilize your own call center? Do you know what it is?
I think we're continuing to use call potential, and we're routing the calls electronically to remote locations. And we've got all the site link remote technology as well, so all the information is readily available.
Yeah, we were in the process of actually going down that path with call potential when we had our significant sale, and it seemed to make a lot of sense. So I think you'll, what I gather, you definitely will enjoy that process. I'm also hearing, for what it's worth, even I'm an investor in an apartment complex with a guy who owns a lot of facilities, and they're actually closing all the rental offices for apartments as well. So storage is certainly not alone. Real quick, there's another question just came in. How are you handling sales training and other operational training remotely? And hiring, what I would actually add onto that, hiring has obviously become a challenge at this time too. You got to bring someone on and train them. And any sense of any tips, tricks you'd share?
Well, I can start this a little bit. We've had to hire a significant number of new property management employees recently, and a lot of the training is still taking place at our corporate office. We have a nice, fairly large conference room where you can practice social distancing with 2 or 3 people in that room, and others can tap in electronically if they're not comfortable. So we've made it at the employee's discretion, and thus far I've seen attendance in person at those training sessions. We have had our area managers; they're the ones who conduct our training, new training of new employees, but also ongoing training for best practices and peak performance during this time period. That's been quite helpful, because the focus has changed. As I don't know that anybody's touched on this call, but I did notice that I will share that in our operation, the goal of the call prior to COVID was always get the customer to if it's a telephone inquiry, get the potential customer to the property where we can show them the guardian difference and our properties, let the properties and the managers sell our conveniences and our benefits to them on site. That's changed drastically to achieving the goal, becoming now achieving either a reservation or an actual complete rental over the phone, where all the paperwork's completed. And I think Ann did talk about this with the remote signing, the e-sign capability that's available through technology. So that has required some evolution in our training, which we've done using Teams video conferences throughout the company.
Great. So I obviously COVID and the world have changed. The world's changed a lot as a result of COVID and what's happening. So I guess I'll go around and maybe start with RK of everything that you've seen. And we're obviously making some structural, and some of these changes will be permanent. What do you think some of the best changes that you've seen come out of this? Something that you could see as a positive going forward.
Well, I think the pursuit of paperless rentals is probably one of the biggest changes I've seen in operators that didn't have that capability and that were lagging behind in wanting to try and get there. They saw it as an expense that wasn't necessary, and now they see it as a basic fundamental of the business is to be able to do as much of the transaction virtually as possible. But that whole component of the paperless transaction, being able to do it remotely from an iPad or other devices, and how you communicate with the store are probably some of the biggest changes that I've seen that are positive, I believe, in the industry. Makes us more sophisticated. If you use some of our other industries as emulators, such as the car rental industry, you've seen them try and move to very quick, rapid rentals. That was the goal, is to get the customer in, now particularly the business customer. And instead of spending an hour going through the rental process per tenant and move in, now that time frame is greatly compressed, and is sometimes as little as 8 to 10 minutes as a goal. In one of my larger clients, they said, look, we want to get this to less than a 10-minute rental. And what it's done is it's freed up their time to do other things and to tend to business. So I think that's a positive thing. I think the perception of the outside world that we can do this on a contactless basis, we do it on a paperless basis, all those things become much more meaningful and show the progression in our industry that's probably been needed for a long time, because part and parcel, most of the operators may not be quite as sophisticated as Stephen and Ann's operations. They're really market leaders in that category. And so they give the rest of the operators, though, a lot of hope and a lot of promise about being able to deploy technology to become better operators. And one thing I would say is just be communicative, whether it's with your staff, your tenants, your lenders. I mean, this is a community that can kind of rally together, but make sure you document what you're doing so that if you have to have a conversation with a lender because you have quarterly reporting requirements and you're off in your numbers, I would say, document what you do, and when you have that conversation, be able to go right to your documentation and say, look, these are the 5 things we've done. This is where our market is. We went and looked at our market just before our meeting, and here's where our rates are compared to our competitors. And again, using data to be able to do that is a big advantage. But be prepared, and also be communicative.
Yeah, so I'll speak to 2 things that are less kind of specific processes or technologies and more to bigger picture kind of thoughts. I think one is, we believe perfection is the enemy of good. That being said, when we have put initiatives out to the field in the past, I would say we have put them in pretty good shape. This has been what we've talked about through coronavirus, is that this has been an accelerant for our business. And so we have purposely put things out to our field team and basically said, you run with it and you tell us what works and what doesn't, and we can improve from there. And it's been extremely successful. And it has knowingly not gone perfect day 1, but by day 5, it's going much better than it would have if we had spent more time kind of analyzing and training and thinking through it, among our senior team. So that I think is really exciting in terms of how can we get things out faster and make changes faster, particularly as we grow. That's been one thing that I think has been really exciting. And then the second thing I think is to question everything and don't hold anything as a given. We've made major changes with our marketing. We have made major changing with how we think about some of our pricing and discounting, and all of those have challenged, I think, deeply held beliefs in a positive way. And so I hope that I think we will. For those of you who know Dave, he can be quite a contrarian thinker, and it's fun to work with him. But I don't think we will have fears of testing things that could be more outside of the box in the future, because we've had really some good learnings from those through coronavirus.
Got it. Bryan?
I agree. I mean, I agree with what RK was saying, and Ann. The technology and the pandemic has really sped up our wish list. We had talked about doing more Teams calls and Zoom calls, and now it's become second nature. And from a sales and marketing standpoint, we've implemented that with all of our new facilities, with training, and it helps build a relationship. You're actually able to see who you're talking with. On a claim standpoint, using e-signature, using technology to process the claims faster and more efficiently has certainly helped, I guess, speed up that process, and also knock out some of the things that we had long-term goals of getting there. This forced us to implement and change very quickly.
Great. And Stephen?
Well, there's not too much more I can add to all that. Those are all excellent summaries of what's been occurring. But I will say that there's an old saying, and we use it around Guardian. You need to stretch to grow, and when you have adversity, it causes one to stretch, and it causes a company to stretch, try new things, and experiment. And in today's data-based world, and with technology at our fingertips, things move faster, and we want to move faster and get out ahead of them. So I will say that there's a lot of data available that we're trying to utilize at Guardian more and more, both within the company, drawing on best practice groups that we function in, and calls like this. So, many of the things that RK mentioned, and with operators and Ann as well, we're doing the same thing, and more communication. It's so key to reach out into our ecosystem. We talk about our company as really an ecosystem. All of the not just within the company. We all function as companies within an ecosystem, just like organisms do. So all of our vendors, all of our suppliers, all of our key professional ties that we have are all provide information to us, and we want that information to percolate through the company, from the most remote property through to the corporate office, so that we have that information. I think Ann mentioned that. So you're letting the field go work and test and try things, and then that information comes back in, not just from company personnel, but again from outside the company. So that information is power, and it enables us to be empowered to make the best decisions we can at the time. So we're focusing on that a lot as well.
Great. Well, I think that takes us to the top of the hour here. So I want to thank you guys. This is great information with great people. I really appreciate everyone you taking the time out of your busy schedules to do this. Following this, everyone, there's a few more breakout sessions before we conclude the conference, and hope everybody got a lot out of this talk, as well as all the other panels and breakout sessions and trade show floor. And it's been great having everyone here, and thank you all for joining us, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.